with a little introduction to herself now for us.
Hi, I'm Toni Bolton. I write mystery and romantic suspense and crime, mainly contemporary, but I do a little bit of historical romance and crime. But tonight I'll just focus on the contemporary crime, which I think is what most people on this club are interested in. My background is lecturing, and I lectured for many years in law, but mainly commercial law. But that was quite a lot of fun telling stories all the time. And some of the stuff, the things I learned, I managed to incorporate into my books. Anything else you'd like?
Do you want to give us some of the book titles?
Yeah. Well, I have a series called Men of Valor, Women of Steel. They're all ex-military men, family who came out of the forces in America and started a business in property development, made millions, and now they tend to solve crimes. And the first one is Escape from Fear. Can you see it?
Go this way.
No, this way. Okay. Escape from Fear. And this is about a lady who goes to Florida when she finds out her aunt is being intimidated by a man. He's trying to get her to sell her his house, her house, sorry, all the way around. And unfortunately, by the time she gets there, the house has been burnt down, and she, the aunt, is in intensive care with the neighbour whose house was also damaged. Along the way, she meets this man at an airport who tries to pick her up. And when she gets to the house, she finds it's the grandfather's grandson. And together, they try and solve the mystery of why this house was burnt down. But the important thing is she's coming out of hiding to help her aunt. Why has she been hiding? And the book is about a woman trying to escape her fear. She has been abused by her ex-fiance, who's still looking for her. And it's all about coercive control, how people can control somebody, their every movement, which is a form of abuse. So there's two things in this book. First, why is the aunt being forced to sell the house? Who burnt it? And the second one is, why was she hiding? And how is she going to solve her life and escape her fear of abuse? That's the first one.
Great. Do you ever get called on as an expert if your background's in law? Do you ever advise other authors?
I've actually been on a crime panel where I did give quite a lot of information out there, particularly on the role of psychopaths and sociopaths and coercive control again. Yeah, so you can imagine that the psychopaths are the charming, very influential people who lie through their teeth. You've often seen them in the office. They'll tell a barefaced lie, but they'll never ever show fear or regret. And the sociopaths are far less outgoing. They're more likely to be the sort of person who moves from job to job, have difficulty with relationships, things like that. So I've given talks on that on crime panels before.
Wonderful. Come back this way a little bit.
This way, sorry.
I can see you. Helen. Helen Blenkinsop has asked. She says, hi. She said she was sorry she was 2 minutes late. She'd like to ask if you visit the locations you write about.
Have I what? I missed that.
She says she'd like to ask if you visit the locations you write about.
Yes. I have visited the location for one of my other books, which is Saving Grace. This was in part of California, Mammoth Mountain, and it's about a lady whose employer's house has been blown up. Luckily, most of the family escape, even though they're injured, and she is worried because she thinks that the baby that she is looking after as a nanny is going to be kidnapped and killed, as she overheard the criminals in the cellar saying that all of the people in the family were going to be murdered, a revenge attack. She doesn't know who they are, but she takes the car, gets out, climbs out the rubble, takes the family car and heads to their lodge in Mammoth Mountain, where she can hide for a while until she can find out who the baddies are. So yes, I've been there. That's one of the places.
TG, one of our admins and author members, she writes as TK Gearing, wanted to know about your titles. How much input do you have in your titles and your book covers?
Most of the time on my own, actually. I do actually employ someone who does the illustrations, but the rest of it I do actually do most of my own. I do actually ask on Facebook if the Americans if anything is incorrect, and they usually give me quite substantial advice on language and things like that. Doesn't mean so I don't make a mistake, but I do ask for help in that sense.
Why did you choose to give your series a title?
Why did I?
So you called your series Men of Valor and Women of Steel. Why did you choose to give it that title?
Because I wanted the men to be brave. They're ex-military men, and I wanted to show that they were courageous, but I also didn't want fluffy females. All of the females are strong, feisty, independent women. One is a lawyer, the one who's been abused. The second one is a doctor, although she's now been convicted of murdering her husband, and she escapes prison. So that's all of them are very, very strong females, and that's why I wanted Women of Steel. I don't know why it keeps moving in and out. It doesn't normally do that. Women of Steel. So I didn't want them to be vicious or mean, but I wanted them to have a backbone. So when things went wrong, they could manage to deal with most of the things themselves. And they ask the men, obviously, help them, but they play a strong part in solving the mysteries themselves.
T and was wondering how much research you do. So if your men are all ex-military men, how much research do you have to do on like American military?
I do quite a lot of research. I also do a lot of research into the FBI. I've gone on to the Quantico training site because I've gathered authors. If you go there, they will actually show you around some of the training grounds. It's quite good. And I've done an awful lot of research into the scientific side. Like, for example, if you can't just get DNA off of hair, you've got to have a proper hair ball with DNA on it, things like that. So I did a lot of work, looked at the internet. There was quite a lot of information on American sites which told me how they went about their forensic work. So I looked at that, and the same in England. And I did a lot of psychological research into sociopaths and psychopaths and the law of coercive control for the first book, particularly because the law was changing. At one point, if, say, a woman, and it can be a man, but if it was a woman who was being stalked, she virtually had to prove there would be physical harm before she could get an injunction. Now you've only got to show fear that you might be harmed. So harassment is now part of the law of coercive control. So I did a lot of work on that.
Why did you choose to set your books in America?
I set my books in America because I thought there was a lot of scope if I used guns and things like that. I know in the ganglands of England they use gangs, but they use guns. But on the whole, I think there's more scope for excitement and the locations too. For Saving Grace, where the child is going to be bombed and murdered, I was able to use the mountains, and then they have a race across the desert, which the desert actually goes from just outside of Mammoth right the way through to California to Los Angeles. So that was a path we drove on one occasion. So I thought there was a lot of scope there for fun.
Samantha, my partner in crime in the author chats, wants to know if it's difficult to balance romance and crime writing.
I think romance actually gives the crime writing a bit more intensity. I wouldn't want to just write a book of romance. If I do build romance in, there's usually a lot of tension, there's usually a lot of issues, a lot of conflict that they have to sort out. Very rarely are the men and the women in this series, Men of Valor, Women of Steel, very rarely are they friendly at the beginning. They're usually enemies, or in one case, an FBI agent is trying to find a convicted murderess. There's usually some conflict that takes quite a while to work through. And so, yes, romance can be built in if it's built in that way. I quite enjoy the intensity.
Samantha wonders if you've ever done a course to support your research.
No, apart from my law degree. My law degree obviously gave me quite a lot of information, but if there's a problem now and I don't understand something, I just know which cases to go and look for and where to look. But most of the research, in fact, was just done on the internet.
Helen has commented again. She says it's fascinating to hear about your research on psychological profiling and American law enforcement. She also read your historical fiction in the first lockdown and really liked it.
Yes.
She goes on, she says, Dawn, I assume that needed lots of research too. How did you go about doing your historical research?
Right. Well, first, when I was a teenager, I was an avid reader of Georgette Heyer, who's one of the most renowned writers in historical Regency fiction, and most of my books are in that era. And one thing about fascinating details about Georgette Heyer is she actually wrote a history of Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo, and meticulous detail of how they fought that battle, and that has then been used to train soldiers at West Point in America. So I've used a lot of her material as the basis, the mannerisms, the talking, the speech, and things like that. But then you do actually have to go into the museums like the Victoria Albert Museum and check the clothes they wore and the guns, and you have to go to military museums and online and look at things like that. So I spent a lot of time doing that. But I did do a history degree many years ago, so it did help with the basic history.
How did you find lockdown affected your writing?
I spent hours doing editing. I found it more difficult to be creative than to edit. So I spent hours doing editing and re-editing my books. And I did write one particular book, my latest one I did, which is Danger in the Hills, and this is under my Alexi Bolton. And this one I wrote about arsonists. I've always found arsonists interesting, why they want to use that form of murder or destruction of property. And this one is about a man who's left the army to look after his young daughter when he became separated from his wife. But now she wants the child back, and an arsonist is targeting him and other people in the village. So that was interesting. Also trying to find out how the police would work in that way, and doing a lot of online work, how fires were started. And I did once listen to Inspector Bates' programme. I don't know if some of you know that one, where there was an arsonist and also a person who was selling forged paintings. And I got a lot of information from that. That was very interesting, on how you could set a candle and let it run, and it finally set fire on its own to a building because there was paraffin around and things like that. So I did a lot of research for that during lockdown, but mainly editing.
This leads us nicely onto a question that Sarah Mackenzie asked. And she said, do you ever worry about what people would think of your Google history?
My Google history?
Yeah.
No, actually, no. When I get reviews for books, as long as the reviews are accurate, it's the same sort of thing. If they're accurate, I don't mind. They can say what they want. And my Google history, no, I don't think it worries me a great deal.
Samantha asked what advice should you give to members who are thinking of writing a book. Are there any resources that you would recommend?
The first thing I would do, if you want to get it published in self-publishing, is build a platform. Make sure you perhaps just put a small amount chapters every so often onto things like Wattpad, so you can build a readership. And later on, when you do publish it, you will have people who are already interested in the book. But the other thing for research, I think, is write about something you're fascinated by, because then your enthusiasm will come over in the book and in your writing. And use an editor. I've only used an editor twice now, and use a beta reader. I found beta readers fascinating, really helpful. So get advice, get people to read carefully your book and take their advice. But if they try and change your style, your voice, then I would, as one editor tried to do with me, I would not follow their advice, but I would follow other advice.
How large a team of beta readers do you have?
I have very few, I only have one or two. I've been building up slowly. I think the maximum I've got is 5, but they're good. They're good people who do tell me what they think is wrong with the book and the structure, whether something's believable. And in many cases, one person I do ask about the law, and they and the police, and they do give me good solid advice if something's unrealistic. And I hope the books are okay in that sense, although we all make mistakes.
There's a member, Jill Griffin, says, how do you choose? Do you know Jill?
Yep.
She says, how do you choose your character names, and do you ever change them once you've finished a book?
They seem to just come out of thin air, actually. I'm trying to think. For Joshua, I remember a lad down the road was called Joshua, and someone said it about it. His mum said, well, it's a simple name, can't be mishandled too much. It's masculine and it's a nice name, so I borrowed that. Kirsten, I chose that because she's Scandinavian in origin. Her mum's Scandinavian, so that's why I use that one. Celia is my favourite one, because she is in my historical books and she's got eyes that are slightly slanted like a cat. So her dad named her after a feline, short version, Tophelia, which I thought was appropriate for her. I don't change them very often, thinking about it.
Fair enough. Someone on here is coming up as Facebook user said, do you set yourself a daily word target?
So I missed that.
Do you set yourself a daily word target?
No, I have to say no. Until recently, with the lockdown, when it has been a little bit more difficult, I have to admit that I've never ever had writer's block, and I tend to just write so many words a day and have a break if I feel like it. But I can write for days and days on end, and usually do about 2,000 or 3,000 a day.
What are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on a paranormal, which is a medieval paranormal, about two young people who meet unexpectedly. Funny enough, the girl actually saves the young man's life, and later on he meets her, because they were only 12 at the time of their first meeting. He meets her when they're 17 and he saves her from being raped, and he finds she's got powers. He barely needed to stop the men from raping her. Just looking at them, they started shaking and coughing. And also later on, he finds they're linked in some way when she chases off down the mountain and these beings come and follow her. And he's got a ring and he uses the ring, and by accident, the jewel shines onto these beings and burns them, and they run away. So he realizes there's some link between him and the girl, and they're both trying to find out their ancestry. They're trying to find out their family, as they're both orphans now, and that's what the story's about. But it's set in about 1540.
Do you plot your books out in advance, or do you make it up as you go?
No, I'm not a plotter. Only once have I plotted, but nearly all the rest I do make it up as I go, and it tends to develop. Often I start something the night before, and the next morning, overnight, my brain's just thought the plot out. I'm a great believer in thinking overnight, that your brain can work on its own and develop things overnight.
Do you I'm going to ask you one of our UK CBC favourite questions now.
Go on.
What's your most memorable moments as an author?
My memorable moment in law?
Your memorable moments as an author?
Oh, as an author, my memorable moment. I think it was when I got my first review where somebody actually said they liked the book, and they would follow me. They'd want the next one in this series. It's this one. That was it. The fact that somebody really loved the book and they wanted to buy the next one in the series. There's not much more that an author really wants. Okay, you might want to earn money, but you really want people to enjoy your book and want more of them.
Did you self-publish all of your books?
Yes, I did. And the reason was I wrote Escape from Fear and I sent it to a publisher. It took nearly 18 months for a reply. And then they said, there's some good ideas, but you need to work on this and that. So I sent it back, and it took another 6 months. And they sent it back to me again with exactly the same criticisms. And I'd already sent another book, a historical book, to them. This was Harlequin. And they came back with exactly the same comments on the second book. So I thought, hang on, I don't like the integrity of this company, and I'm not impressed by them, so I decided to self-publish. But I might in the future send some of my books in to agents if I think I could find a good publisher, because it is very helpful to do that. But I quite enjoy self-publishing at the moment.
How do you find doing the sort of marketing aspect of?
I think, like most people, it's not. Most authors would say it's not easy. You really do have to build an author platform, which I'm doing very, very slowly, using newsletters to reach people, doing parties where I introduce the books to people. The most important thing is engaging with readers. If you can get a reader to read your book and like it, and then you know who they are and you can engage with them, that's brilliant. The problem with the internet and selling on Amazon, it's very difficult to know who your reader is. Whereas perhaps if you did a reading in a bookshop or in a hall, you've got your audience there you can engage with more easily. So I think that's the problem with marketing like that, is the difficulty of engaging with people.
TG wonders that if you could live anywhere in the world to write, where would you choose?
Ooh. Do you know, I think my favourite place I've ever been to, and I'd go back next year if we could, is Costa Rica. And that's where I write from. Most beautiful, friendly, clean place, and wonderful climate, wonderful people. I'd live there. Lots of jungle and things to write about.
Lovely. Helen has asked, she says, which of your characters do you most admire? Great question so far, and she's just noticed the skull behind me. I've got a T-Rex skull as well, Helen.
Trying to think. It's a toss between Kirsten, who manages to overcome her fear after being physically and sexually abused, and to carry on. And in one of the next books, when there's real problems in her marriage, she still carries on and gives birth to twins, despite horrendous circumstances after the bombing in one of the books. And the other one, I have to say, another one I have great respect for is the girl in Innocence and Deception. She is a convicted murderess, and when she finds her child may be adopted by her sister-in-law, who she despises and is cold and hard, she is determined to escape and find her daughter. And against all adversity, she still remains strong and caring towards other people. And I think Kirsten is the same. She's caring towards other people despite adversity. So it's a toss-up between those two.
When we can get out in what my husband affectionately calls the after times, do you have a dream author event that you would like to attend?
Which author event?
Do you have a dream author event that you would like to attend? So one that you've not done maybe, but you'd love to do.
I wouldn't mind. Yes, I think I'd like to do one of the London or the Edinburgh. Edinburgh's a lovely place to visit. If I had to go, I'd like to do one of the Edinburgh crime festivals. That would be great fun. It's a great place to visit and place to be situated.
Yeah, there's so many book festivals I want to go to when we can travel again. I'm gonna just go back and have a look at these. So my dad is watching. He says, how long have you been writing, and is it all you dreamed of doing?
I've been writing about 5 years, but when I was about 10, I really used to write an awful lot, and I loved it. And then when I went to university, I remember writing and someone saying, oh, you'd never be a writer. Your writing isn't good enough. So, that's not very nice. But then I got so very, very busy with teaching and studying law, because I first taught economics before I studied law. But I just got so busy that I discarded it. And then I started tutoring young children and writing books for young children, which I'd never published. And then one of the characters I thought would be better in an adult's book. And that's what got me going writing adults' books.
Is there, Jason asked, is there a character that you'd like to bring back for a future novel?
Bring back to life.
Well, even back to life, or just, they've left the series, but you'd like to bring them back. You feel like there's more to know about them.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There's there's somebody called Josh Hydrini, and he comes in one of the historical books, The Militia Man's Lady, and he's had a hard life. He was a very, very clever young man in the army, but he sadly was enticed into a relationship with a much older woman, and being very lonely and very young, he had an affair with her, thinking she was badly treated by her husband. In fact, she'd been having affairs with lots of young men behind her husband's back, and he has a duel that nearly kills her husband. And when he finds out that in fact she was deceiving both him and her husband, he leaves the army, and he is the next character my book is going to be for my next book, which at the moment I haven't got a title except for River Maiden. But my next historical book is about him and the lady who gives him more faith in women, because he's lost all his faith in women after that awful episode with that lady.
Why do you choose to write under different names?
Right. Well, first, classic marketing. The historical readers don't always want to read the same things as the contemporary romance readers. And some of them, if they know you write one thing, will not read anything else. They just don't want to know. They don't want to cross genres. But the other thing was I was going to first do my children's stuff under my own name. And the adult material is not suitable for young children. The mums would have a fit, I think, if an 8-year-old got hold of it. So I deliberately kept those separate from anything I'm going to write, which I am for young children. I'm going to publish soon.
My favourite question to ask at an author chat is, would you make a graphic novel of one of your books?
A graphic novel? Yeah, you mean cartoons? I'd love to do something like that with children's stuff, because I do some of my own art, and I'd love to do my own comic books with that would be great fun. Bringing together the things, because years ago I wanted to be an artist when I was a child, so to bring together writing and art would be phenomenally good.
Samantha wonders, is there anything or any person from real life that's inspired a character or story?
Yes, sadly Kirsten was inspired by a lady I worked with who was murdered. When I was working in the university, a very charming, easygoing lady who trusted everybody was stalked and murdered in her back garden. She was stabbed. To this day, I don't know if they've ever found out. The police did. They believe they know who did it, but when I left university, they still haven't managed to pin it on him. But sadly, Kirsten is very trustworthy. She's very intelligent, but no confidence. And the lady at work was very similar to her. So you could see how they were taken in by these awful people in Kirsten's case, an abuser, and the other lady, someone who stalked and murdered her. So that was definitely based on that one.
Samantha wonders, do you keep in touch with any other authors?
Oh yeah,
Of like a
yes,
support group of other authors.
yeah. Well, I belong to something called New Street Authors, of which Helen is also a member, and Solihull Writers, of which Jill Griffin is a member. So yes, we regularly go and listen to each other's work. We perform at um, at readings. New Street Authors, and particularly Helen, runs readings in pubs, well, or did run before lockdown, readings in pubs where we'd read excerpts from our books. So, yes, we do have a very good support groups around Birmingham and Solihull.
So, what authors have been an influence on your writing?
Well, Georgia Hare definitely on the historical because she was so accurate. Um, on the crime, probably I less so in books, but I've watched an awful lot of programs like Inspector Bates, people like that. So the authors of those books have shown quite a lot of information to me. Vera, I read the author, read the books of Vera, and got information from that on one occasion. So those two mainly. The rest I tend to watch television and get information from crime serials.
What books are on your Christmas list?
My Christmas list.
Yeah.
What do you think? I got to think about that. I've got a few. Oh, I've got Sarah from Tracy Trainer. I still got to read Helen Blenkinsop's. I read her Beta read her first book, The Bright Lies, and I love that. And so I've got to read the full version of that. So those two will be in my list.
I think Helen's commented on the stream. She says she can't wait to get back to the Gunmaker's Arms for a story night.
Yeah, all of us are.
There's so many questions on the stream. I'm trying to choose which one to ask you next.
It's okay.
Samantha says, if you could spend an evening chatting to any author, who would you choose?
Any author? Trying to think. Do you know, it wouldn't be. It would be the person who's written the script for Spooks, the spy series. I think it's so interesting the relationship between the characters, or the one who wrote. What's the other one? I can't remember. Just gone. New Tricks, because again, I think the just the interplay between the characters is phenomenal, and the character development is so good in New Tricks. So whoever wrote those plays, I would go for.
Have you ever cast your books for TV in your head? Do you have an image of the actors that would play the characters?
Yeah, there's one who's in the Spy Master's Redeemer, and he would be brilliant if there's a model called Zach. He's tall, blonde, and clean shaven, but slim but muscular. I can't remember his second name, but he would be a fantastic Drader, because Drader is a sinister, rather pale character in looks, but is very, very strong-willed, and Zach always looks like that to me.
Are there any topics that you wouldn't write about?
I bring rape and abuse into my books, but I very, very rarely actually write graphically about those. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't mind a certain amount of violence, but I prefer to allude to something like rape rather than describe it graphically. It's very unpleasant. So that would be something I'm careful about. There's discussion of what's happened to someone, but not in great detail.
Samantha asks what your tipple of choice would be when you can visit the Gunmaker's Arms again.
What my time? This is quite bad.
What will be your tipple of choice when you can visit the Gunmaker's Arms again?
I don't know. Does she want to know any particular book or something, or what?
No, she's saying what would be your choice of drink?
Oh, sorry. This isn't the best of microphone. Oh, my friend. Now, if you'd asked me on the ski resort, that would have been easy. It would have been margarita. Probably a daiquiri or something like that. I fancy if we go back, I want to normally have wine, but a cocktail would be very nice to toast being able to get back out of all this mess. Get some daiquiri, margarita, something like that. But definitely, if you ask me if I was going skiing and writing a book while I'm skiing, because I often do write a book in the evenings when I'm skiing, it would be a margarita sitting in the sun.
Wow. How do you celebrate each? Do you celebrate each publication day?
Oh yeah, go out for a meal, definitely. Go out for a meal and a glass of wine. It's very nice. That's nice. With my husband.
Who's also your tech support?
See, stop walking through actually. He was doing the cooking earlier on, so probably telling things true. But yes, I'll give him his due. He doesn't read things very often for me. Being dyslexic, when he does read, he points spelling mistakes that don't exist. That doesn't help. But he does do all the technical support for me. He is good on that.
Yeah. T says, if you could live the life of one of your characters, who would you choose?
Ooh. I think I'd probably like to live in the 19th century in this fictional country called Thelia, because it's such an interesting period of time after the Napoleonic Wars, when in her country they were beginning to industrialize, and the whole emperor is the emperor. They're in a civil war situation, and she and Dreda later on help avoid a civil war between the rebels and the emperor. They try and stop this. So I think it would be a very interesting time to be living in the middle of a civil war and have all the secrecy, the codes and things like that. That would be fascinating. And also the clothes and the politics, the mannerisms of people, the way they spoke would be fascinating.
Do you ever have to act out any of the scenes of your books just to sort of visualize them in your head as you're writing them?
I do actually think them through overnight. Yeah, I must say I like thinking, and I get pictures of what they could do and what they would say. Yes, I do that all the time.
Do you have a notebook?
Not the murder ones though; they can be too graphic at night. Under the bed.
Do you have like a notebook that you carry around with you? So if you get inspiration at night, you can jot down your notes.
I'm afraid not. No, my memory's fine. The memory works, and I write it down occasionally when I sit down. But no, I find a lot of ideas come when we're driving. But no, I don't. I'm not as precise as that. I wish I was. I tend to be more on the creative, not so much disorganized, but ad hoc side.
Oh, we've got a question from another one of our admins here, Lucy. She says, is there a fictional character that you wished you'd created? If you choose anyone that you could have created, who would you choose?
Can't think of one at the moment. I think Poirot. I'm not a great lover of things like Miss Marple, but I have to say, Poirot is such a brilliant character. He, the way his mannerisms, the way he dresses, the way he gently teases the people he works with. I thought that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant characterization. So yes, Poirot would be a good one.
Have you ever been tempted, or have you already done so, written like any short stories or novellas, like spin-off novellas of characters in your series?
Yeah, short stories. I've written some novellas as part of anthologies, and recently I wrote one for the New Romance Cafe, and it's called A Winter's Romance. About 10 of us have written some books for that, written some work for that, little short stories. And one was a Regency story about a man who gambled and won against a young man, and the young man hasn't got the money, so he signs his house over, and the fella goes a few days later and finds the house is still owned by the boy's sister. So what does he do? And the boy makes her his guardian. I say the boy is over 21. Makes this man this girl's guardian. So he's lumbered with a girl he's not interested in looking after, a house he only half owns, and he's got to somehow get this girl to London and get someone to look after her. And that's quite tricky for him because she's not the sort of female he normally would have anything to do with. She's bright, she's independent, she's run her dad's farm, and she likes engineering and things like that. He's never come across a woman who is as independent and resourceful. She's not fluffy, she's not misfish. So yes, that was one I recently did. I've written some short stories for anthologies that are crime related and mysteries in the past.
Sam says, "What's your cat called?" She just got a
Oh, my cat, two of my cats.
She just ran across the back.
One is here. That is Lucifer. This is Lucifer, Louis, because he knits fingers.
Does he?
And there's another one with a black face called Angel. So it's Angel and Lucifer. This is Louis for short.
Brilliant name.
Well, Angel was such a darling when she was a kitten. We thought she never did anything wrong. Yesterday she stole our kebabs off the table, so she's badly named.
Do you keep a character Bible? So do you keep like details of all your characters written down so that you know?
No, I just keep it in my head, and if there's something I'm not sure of, I always go back to the previous stories to check the information. So you get this horrid fear that somebody is going to have their hair colour change in the middle of a story. I've seen that. I've actually seen a woman whose clothes changed in the space of 2 lines, and a horse changed from grey to brown. So it does happen. It's easily done.
Fair enough. Apparently, Lucifer has beautiful blue eyes.
Well, this one does. He's just giving me a dirty look because I picked him up. But yes, and the other one's got blue eyes too. But he's got pale blue, and the other one's got sapphire eyes. Charming characters, like all cats.
Do you have audio versions of your novels?
No, I haven't yet. It's a question of finding the right person. It's quite expensive, so it's something I'm considering. Because I think there's a big market, like my mother. She never does very little reading, never has read a lot, but she watches some. I think she would listen to an audio book, even though she wouldn't concentrate on reading a long novel. I think there's a lot of people who just listen in the car and things, places like that. But it's something I'm considering.
Yeah, we have a lot of members who like to listen to audio books.
It's worth doing, yeah. I think it's quite expensive. That's the thing that's put me off. But I know a lot of people say it's worth it if you take the risk.
Do you sell signed copies of your books?
Yes, I mean I often give them away in competitions. That's when there's quite a few competitions on Facebook, and if someone wins, then I do give signed copies away. I do give signed copies away always when I do readings. If anyone writes a book, I sign it. If someone's bothered to come and listen to you, I think it's worth they buy a book, you sign me. It's only fair.
A lot of our members like to buy their book straight from the author.
Yeah.
Is that something that you do?
At the moment, no, but if I thought, or if people want to message me, I could certainly be very happy to do that and sign them through the post. Yeah, certainly.
Wonderful. It's quite a nice Christmas present, a signed book.
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah,
isn't it?
Particularly if there's a message in it from the author. I think so.
Yeah. I like to give those as presents. Sam says it's easy to switch between writing and editing.
Actually, I think it's not hard because I've now got an editing package called AutoCrit, and I'm doing a proofreading course at the moment, and that is quite difficult because once you've done proofreading, if you then read anyone else's work, you want to proofread it, even if you're beta reading. So that's the only problem, is trying to go into something in too much depth. But yes, I think I can switch from writing to editing very quickly. I find the only thing is, since I've been using the editing package, it takes a darn sight longer to get through a book because it shows you all the mistakes you're making, and the end book is more polished, but it isn't as enjoyable as when you wrote them and didn't know you were making these mistakes. So,
is there any other genres that you haven't tried yet that you'd be tempted to write in?
Yeah, fantasy. I've done it, so I'm doing this bit of paranormal and sci-fi. You asked me earlier, is there something I wouldn't do? I'm not sure I'd do sci-fi because I'm not sure if I've got enough of the background knowledge. I'd have to do an awful lot of research into that. If I thought I could, I would, but sci-fi. I do erotic, but only if there's a good story, because I find so many of the erotic novels there's loads of eroticism, but there isn't always much story to it. So I'm wary of those as well.
I suppose with sci-fi, it's how scientific you want it to be, because some of them are just, a thriller in space, aren't they? There's not really a lot of science in them.
It's true. It just depends how accurate you want to be and how much knowledge one's particularly got. Really. But yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. I mean, I do feel the paranormals. There's lots of things you can think of with paranormals. So much, particularly witches, vampires, all that's great fun. So, and the important thing about writing is to make it fun and enjoy it. If you're going to write it, you're not going to enjoy it. There's going to be war and peace, and you don't enjoy that sort of thing. It's not worth it. It's got to be enjoyable. Otherwise, I wouldn't finish it.
Do you have a writing routine? Do you have like a favorite writing outfit, a place that you work at? Do you listen to music?
In the lounge, late at night. I'm a night bird, so I'm not 4 or 5 in the morning. Although years ago I used to write when I first started till 3 in the morning. But it's nearly always in the evening, about between 9 and about 1 o'clock, and it's usually in the lounge, but occasionally in bed. But not necessarily anything particularly to wear. Or I'm at this desk. This is my study, and this is good for editing because I've got the big screen. I do like being in the lounge and looking at the cats, and they've got their tree they climb in, and things like that. I like to have the animals around me. They're important, and they just sit and watch wisely.
Sam wonders how it felt to see your name in print the first time.
Exciting, and it felt an accomplishment after doing this, working on something, to see your writing in print, and particularly with a cover and things like that. It was wonderful. Great pleasure from that.
We've only got a few minutes left.
Yep.
Would you like to give everyone a recap of like your author names that you write under and some of like your books and where you can be found?
Well, most of my crime writing is actually under Toni Bolton, and as I said, I've escaped from Escape from Fear is the first book about the abused woman. That's my favourite book. And the one that I think your people and the crime club would like most is this one, which is Whisper Softly. This is about Whisper Softly We're Dead under Toni Bolton. And this is where a couple who work in a police team, one's an FBI profiler, ex-Marine, the other's a forensic scientist, and they're trying to find a serial killer who stalks young women and then takes a body part each time. So if you like Silence of the Lambs, this is a sort of book that you would enjoy, as they try to find out who this person is before the killer finishes their task. Why is he collecting bits and pieces? That's and then there is Innocence and Deception. Fellow FBI agent finds this girl drowning in the sea, digs her out, and then finds when she escapes the hospital, she's a convicted murderess. And why did she escape from custody when her parole was so close? Could it be something to do with her daughter? So that's the other one. Saving Grace is where a lady looks after the baby and the children after her employer, and it's blown up. The house is blown up. She escapes and goes to Mammoth Mountain, which I mentioned, trying to find out who the bombers are. And a marshal, who's also a member of the family, is looking for her, but there are others on her trail, and he wants to know who they are. Why do they want to find her? Are they the bombers? And is she he thinks she's part of the crew who bombed the house. He doesn't believe she's innocent, but he wants to save the baby Grace. And the final crime one is Danger in the Hills. And this is the guy who's looking after his young daughter, but is targeted by the arsonists, the arsonist is targeting lots of people in the village, and there's other crimes as well. So they're not quite sure if the arsonist is also responsible for other crimes in the business, in the area. So those are the things that your club probably would be interested in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for everybody for asking me questions and joining me. It's been a pleasure.